I loved her like a prayer whispered at dawn, softly, not for miracles, but for mercy, for peace. Within, I loved her like final prayer, before surrender, complete, no demands asked, no bargains made, only truth offered. I loved her with clean intentions, hands open, heart bare, as one kneels, not to conquer, but to confess everything. I loved her like sacred words, learned slowly, by heart, each syllable careful, each silence holy, each pause meaningful, deep. I loved her without witnesses, without applause, alone, like prayer rooms, empty yet full, quiet yet alive. Still, I loved her through faith alone, when proof absent, missing, belief carried me, hope steadied me, love guided me forward. I loved her like final prayer, uttered, trembling, sincere, voice shaking softly, soul exposed fully, no armor worn. Anywhere, I loved her in desperation moments, when strength faded away as prayers rise, when options vanish, when ego dissolves. Gone, I loved her with humility learned from waiting long, patiently, like prayers unanswered, still repeated, still trusted. Anyway, I loved her without expectation of return or reward, as prayers offered not for gifts, but connection. Pure, I loved her like whispered faith between chaos and calm. When storms questioned, every belief held, still devotion stayed. Firm, I loved her as final prayer before silence arrives, that quiet surrender. When words end and truth remains, only I loved her through broken hope, yet unbroken belief. Inside, like praying wounded, still kneeling, still believing, still I loved her. When answers delayed, when signs confused me, as prayers wait, beyond patience, beyond timelines, human, I loved her without conditions, without contracts, signed, like prayer offered, even if unheard, even if unanswered. Forever, I loved her with reverence deep, not possession, not control, as sacred trust, handled gently, never exploited. Ever, I loved her like final prayer at night's edge, late, when darkness presses and soul searches for light. Somewhere, I loved her through inner wars, fought quietly, alone, as prayer's shield, from inner collapse, from despair, creeping. I loved her like final prayer, before letting go, slow, not because love ended, but because faith demanded release. Graceful, I loved her enough to bless her future paths away, as prayers bless even departures, even endings. Hard, I loved her without resentment, without curses, ever, only gratitude left for having believed, for having loved fully. I loved her like final prayer that changes you inside, not answered externally, but transforming inward, making you softer. True, I loved her with soul honesty that survives loss. Still, as prayers remain, even after silence, echoing gently, within, I loved her like final prayer. So, love stays sacred, The prayer waited in quiet corridors of unanswered nights. Long, I loved her, like kneeling patience. When heaven stayed silent, I kept believing beyond reasonable limits. Faith stretched thin. Still, the prayer lingered between inhale, exhale, hope trembling softly. Inside, I loved her, like sacred patience, practiced through delay. Daily, each sunrise questioned, yet devotion remained, unmoved and loyal. Firm, the prayer learned to live without immediate miracles. Offered, I loved her, like whispered surrender, when control dissolved completely, hands unclenched slowly, expectations released gently, trust handed upward. Free, the prayer matured, from asking outcomes to asking strength. Only, I loved her, like humble faith, accepting mystery gracefully when signs confused and paths diverged. Belief steadied steps, quiet, the prayer endured through doubt storms, sheltering fragile hope. Carefully, I loved her, like midnight devotion, practiced unseen, unpraised, no witnesses present, no validation sought, only sincerity remained. Pure, the prayer softened my sharp edges, teaching mercy first. Always, I loved her, like learning forgiveness. Before apologies came, ever releasing anger slowly, protecting tenderness, choosing peace daily. Again, the prayer listened, more than it spoke. Silence instructed me. Well, I loved her, like reverent restraint, holding love lightly, respectful, never demanding ownership, never forcing presence, letting freedom breathe. Wide, the prayer faced the truth, gently, that love doesn't bind souls. I loved her, like patient release, when paths misaligned, sadly, blessing her footsteps, even when departing, even when painful. Hard, the prayer remained, after letting go, echoing in chambers. Still, I loved her, like faith surviving, after the altar, empty, candles burned quietly, wax pooling slowly, light refused quitting. Yet, the prayer taught that devotion transforms, even without fulfillment. Granted, I loved her, like final surrender, turning grief into grace, not erasing love, but refining it into quieter forms. Soft, the prayer healed what it couldn't change, reshaping my spirit. Inside, I loved her, like disciplined faith, carried forward gently. Now, no bitterness follows, no curses spoken, only gratitude held. Close, the prayer settled into memories, warmth, a sacred scar kept. I loved her, like final prayer that stays answered. Within,